So we have two matrices right here. Remember, matrices is the plural of the word matrix. So we have two matrices, A and B. We're going to multiply to find C. It says find C if A times B equals C. So first thing we want to find is the size of the new matrix C. So we need to find the size of A and B and first determine if it's possible. So remember our size of a matrix, we do number of rows by number of columns. So A has 1, 2, 3 rows. So A is a size 3 by 1, 2, 3 columns, so size 3 by 3. Remember, we don't multiply that. We want a position for rows by a position for columns, so leave it like that. Don't write 9. Okay, so B has size 1, 2, 3 rows by 1, 2 columns. So to check to see if multiplication is even possible, we write these side by side and we check to make sure the middle numbers match. Remember, this is rows by columns, so the number of columns of A has to match the number of rows of B. And they do, so we are able to do this multiplication. Matrix C has size of the outer two numbers, 3 by 2. So matrix multiplication is possible. Let's find each. Consider a matrix 3 by 2. And we're going to label each position. So if this is matrix C, this entry is the C11 because it's the first row, first column. This is the C12 because it's the first row, second column. This is the C21, second row, first column. The C22 entry, second row, second column. The C31 entry, third row, first column. And this is the C32 entry, third row, second column. So keep in mind, these numbers here tell you where they go in the answer, but they also tell you where they came from, how you got that multiplication. So this one right here tells us row 1 in A, and this one right here tells us column 1 in B. Column 1 in B. Okay, so let's look at row 1 in A and column 1 in B. Remember, we're going to do the first times the first, plus the second times the second, plus the third times the third. So the first entry in the row times the first entry in the column. 4 times 3 plus the second times the second. So 0 times 1 plus the third times the third. The third entry in the first row and the third entry in the column. So -2 times -7. Does that make sense? Let's do it again. First times the first plus the second times the second plus the third times the third. So we end up with what? That is, I'm going to erase this just so you can see. That is a 12 plus 0 plus 14, which looks like, what, a 26? Okay, so there's a 26 right here. Okay, let's look at the next one. C12. That tells us to use row 1 in A and use column 2 in B. So row 1 in A is here, column 2 in B is here. And we do the same thing, the first times the first, plus the second times the second, plus the third times the third. So 4 times 7, plus 0 times 2, plus -2 times 9. First times the first, plus the second times the second, plus the third times the third. We end up with, what, 28 plus 0 minus 18? Check me. Looks like that's, what, 10? And that is the 1, 2 entry of the new matrix, so there's a 10 right here. Okay, let's continue. The C21 says we will use row 2 in A and column 1 in B. Okay, so I'm going to circle row 2 in A and column 1 in B. So 11 times 3 plus 1 times 1 plus 8 times -7. And let's check. First times the first plus the second times the second plus the third times the third. We should get what? 33 plus 1 minus 56, 22, but it's negative because the sign of the 56 is negative, and that was the biggest one. So -22 goes in the 2, 1 entry. Okay, let's look at the C22. That tells us use row 2 in A and use column 2 in B. So row 2, column 2. First times the first plus the second times the second plus the third times the third. 11 times 7 plus 1 times 2 plus 8 times 9. So that's 77 plus 2. 9 times 8 is 72. Let's see. So 77 plus 2 plus 72 looks like that is 151. And 151 goes in the 2, 2 entry of the new matrix. So right here. Okay, let's see what's next. Okay, we have C31. So this says use row 3 in A and column 1 in B. So row 3 in A, column 1 in B. 5 times 3 plus negative 4 times 1 plus 0 times negative 7. First times the first plus the second times the second plus the third times the third. So that's 15 minus 4 plus 0. Okay, looks like we get, what, 11? So the 3-1 entry is an 11. Okay, now let's do the last one. C32, use row 3 in A and column 2 in B. So row 3 is right here, column 2 is here. Remember, you only use rows in the first matrix ever, and you only use columns in the second matrix. Rows and then columns. Okay, so first times the first plus the second times the second plus the third times the third. We get 5 times 7 plus negative 4 times 2 plus 0 times 9. Okay, 7 times 5 is 35 minus 8 plus 0. So what is that, 27? And 27 is the 3, 2, so it goes right here. Okay. So hopefully you're sort of getting the hang of it. Let's try a really big one. If you can do this really big one, you're set. Okay, so we have a really big A and a really big B. This could get even bigger. Remember, matrices are often used in computer science, or they represent big, large pieces of data in lots of science classes or statistics or even businesses. So these matrices could be huge. So we've given you a relatively small one here. Let's find the size. 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. So this is a 4 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. B is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because there's 5 rows, by 1, 2, 3, 4 columns, 5 by 4. We see 4 by 5, 5 by 4. If we write them side by side, the middle numbers match. We know the size of matrix C is the outer numbers, 4 by 4. Okay, so let's do a few. Now, we're not finding them all. There's going to be a whole bunch. We're just going to find a few specific ones that I've called out to you. So C42 says use row 4 in A, and this 2 here says use column 2 in B. So row 4. Okay, we do the first times the first plus the second times the second plus the third times the third plus the fourth times the fourth plus the fifth times the fifth. We have more entries here. So 6 times 3 plus negative 3 times 1 plus 1 times 5 plus 0 times 3 plus 0 times negative 7. And we get, what, 18 minus 3 plus 5 plus these zeros. Okay, so 18 minus 3 is 15 plus 5, so we get a 20. Okay, and then we have the C34. We're going to use row 3 in A and use column 4 in B. So notice I'm going out of order, but it doesn't matter what order you're in. These numbers here tell you what entries to look at, what rows and what columns. Rows always in the first value, the first matrix will always use rows, second will always use columns. So row 3 and column 4 in B. So 2 times 1 plus 5 times 1 plus 3 times 7 plus negative 4 times 5 plus 0 times negative 4. 2 plus 5 plus, what, 21? Minus 20 plus a 0. So 2 plus 5 is 7. This is 1, so we get 8. C15 says use row 1 in A, use column 5 in B. So row 1 in A, Uh-oh. Column 5, we don't have 5 columns, right? Column 5 would be here. So this is not possible. Okay, let's try the last one. C23. This says use row 2 in A and use column 3 in B. So row 2 in A, column 3 in B. 1 times 9 plus 4 times 2 plus 1 times 1 plus 1 times 4 plus negative 9 times negative 3. Let's check it again. First times the first, plus the second times the second, plus the third times the third, plus the fourth times the fourth, plus the fifth times the fifth. So what's that? 9 plus 8 plus 1 plus 4 plus 27? 49. Okay, hopefully this is all starting to make sense.